Pantheism is this belief that everything is God, that you are God, that the tree is God, that your friend is God, and that basically everything that is created or exists is the God or the universe experiencing itself. It has its roots in Eastern religion that we'll get into. And unfortunately, it seems to be a growing belief in America and the West in our post-Christian society. And so we are going to talk about that today on the Things You Don't Hear in Church podcast. My name is Ethan.
My name is Derry, and y'all go check us out on social media. We have extra content everywhere you might want to see it, as well as Ethan has started his own personal channel. So you go subscribe there if you want to as well. Ethan, you want to tell people what that's called?
Yeah, so I started my own thing called Everyday Gospel, just geared towards helping Christians have a better understanding of the Bible and inspiring them to share the gospel with others. And so this podcast is geared towards like maybe Jesus curious or people who have questions about Christianity or Christians struggling with questions. And my other channel is geared towards people who want to look more into Bible study specifically. So you can, maybe I'll put a little card right now up so you guys can click on that or just go there after the podcast. Watch this whole podcast and then go there and subscribe. Thanks for the shout out, Derry. Wasn't planning on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. But we have content all over the place too, guys, if you want to go see it. We make Instagram Reels and sometimes TikToks and other extra YouTube videos and clips you can see if you don't want to watch the whole podcast. You can just watch parts of it that maybe be interesting to you on YouTube as well. We clip it up and put it out there. So go check it out. But today we're talking about pantheism, and that might be a word you've heard of before, but you're like, what is that? I know there's like the belief where people believe in one God. That's usually what probably most of our followers will believe in, monotheism, belief in one God. That's like Judaism, Christianity, Islam, a lot of those belief systems. And that's pretty typical, I think, to our Western society. When we say the word God, most people think of kind of the same thing. Some people might have a more personified version of that, but we think of an all-powerful being that's somewhere else in a different dimension that may or may not be controlling things that are here. And that's what just I think the layperson would think of, right? And then you might know polytheism, which is like the belief in a lot of gods. So those are the typical two that a lot of people think about. And then there's atheism, of course. So you don't believe in a god. Or agnosticism, where you don't know God, if God exists. But pantheism is a very interesting belief that we've talked a little bit about before, but not in a full episode. It's the belief, like Ethan said at the beginning, that basically there's this analogy that I think is helpful that a lot of Eastern religions use. Also, shout out Christianity, also an Eastern religion that people don't talk about a lot. Came from the East. Hey, now. Anyways, funny joke, but it's like a sea, okay? God is a sea, and everything in the sea is everything that exists. And you experiencing your life right now are a part of that sea. You're part of a wave in the sea, and you're just a small part of the experience of what it's like to be God, okay? So you are God in one of God's states, I guess. But you are still a part of just the overarching sea or body of water that is everything, basically. But you're just one part of it, experiencing what it's like to be that one part of this bigger body that is all a oneness. So that's what pantheism is, classically. But I think a lot of New Age people today have kind of co-opted it to be their own thing. Have you ever run into those people before, Ethan?
Oh, have I? There was a time I was in the Middle East during COVID, and because of that, I give that qualifier because it was COVID, the locals weren't allowed to go outside, but the government couldn't really stop foreigners from kind of doing things. So they're like, yeah, you guys, we can't really tell you what to do. Just if you're Turkish, I was in Turkey, don't go outside. And so we were like, well, we're foreigners, so we'll go outside and see who's out there. And we would run into a lot of people from Europe. Specifically, there were some Russians we ran into that were New Age. And one of them said, I remember we were sitting on a mountain, we were all hanging out, and we were sitting up in this like ancient ruins looking over the sea, and it was a beautiful day. I'll give her that. And she just goes, she's like, this is heaven. And she's like, had been talking all day about how like we are God or something like that, and we are the universe experience itself, and this is heaven right now. We just have to realize it. And she's just like kind of trying to get in tune with this peace that, oh yes, right now I am part of the divine, and I am the divine. I'm recognizing that, and this is heaven. This is what is, and we are all part of what is. And I remember looking at her like, yo, if this is heaven, this is really bad. I mean, we got like slavery at an all-time high in the world, or all-time. Oh, this is all-time low, I think. But slavery's still going around. Different people maybe say different things because they have different definitions of slavery. But like people being taken advantage in like work camps in Africa for iPhone users, right? For the cobalt for that goes into everything in the Western countries. We got unfortunately human trafficking. We have injustices and all these problems. We have war. We're right now on the verge of World War III. It's like, and we've been on the verge of World War III for many years apparently. So I'm just showing that life is not great right now. And so if this is heaven, like this is a pretty poor heaven. Whoever said this is heaven, maybe there's a better God out there, which there is, the Christian God. So yeah, definitely have ran into those, even running into them in America during evangelism, sharing with people who are maybe looking into Taoism and stuff like that. What about you? What is your experience with people who believe this?
Yeah, I think being from California, that's like, especially being from Ojai, like it's a very new agey spiritual kind of area. The best thing that I can like describe to you what Ojai is like is that there is spiritual financial planning centers where you can literally go and have someone spiritually help you with your finances. That's just the kind of place that I live in. And so the amount of times that I've heard people say that, they're coming to be enlightened and realizing the divine part of themselves or realizing the divine in other people and stuff like that is just all the time. It's just the base belief for a lot of people that live here. And I think it's very fascinating, right? Because there is if you're going to say, okay, I don't like the Christian God or like the God that you're in your country that you grew up with, right? Which is just Judeo-Christian values, just the idea of monotheism in general. You're going to say, well, I don't really like that. But you're still open to spiritual experiences, which to not be open, I think, would be to deny reality, just to deny the basic human experience that if you're going to reject God or the idea of God, like immediately there's some kind of void of purpose that's left over. And every human being that is alive has a desire to be a meaningful person and live some kind of meaningful life. And maybe some people would reject that notion and say, well, I don't need anything grand to happen in my life. I don't need to achieve anything grand. I just want to experience this life and have a family and just live a normal kind of existence, right? But you still want that normal existence, even though it's a little more mundane than maybe someone who wants to be king of the world or something. You still want that to be purposeful and meaningful. You want to have a family. You want to feel like you belong. You're searching for a home, right? You still want there to be some kind of purpose in it. And so I think if you reject like modern ideas in the West of what God is like, you still search for some kind of purpose. And that's why a lot of these New Agers have adopted pantheism in a way, because you start to do some self-reflection and you start to read a couple of books and you start to realize, man, like there is something more valuable about humanity than just the fact that we're some kind of transcendent animals. Like there has to be something more valuable, more meaningful to us than that. And you start to have maybe spiritual experiences. You start to do psychedelics or just meditation a lot, or even just a human being observing the things around them. Like you observe the beauty of a sunset, you observe the beauty of human interaction. And you're like, wow, there is something that I'm observing here with my conscious mind that feels much more meaningful, impactful, deep than just what's a few like molecules bashing into each other, right? Like, and when you're left with that, you're like, wow, there's got to be something more valuable here. And when you hear about the idea of like a monotheistic God, you might be like, you don't really like that. Don't really like the idea of like this like male God that's watching over everybody, like making people do things, and I have to follow what he wants. That doesn't feel very free.
That's the most Californian thing ever that you said male God.
Yeah. Like just like all the stereotypical things you hear about God, right? About your conceptualization of what God is like from maybe what you've heard loosely growing up. But you still like you don't like that, but you still want to believe in some kind of deeper or higher existence, right? And you want to be a part of that. You like just like everyone that is alive, you want to be a part of that higher existence in some way, right? me and Ethan as Christians think that that's being a part of God's way and living God's way, and communing with God. You get to be a part of that higher power. But for people who are in this kind of New Age cycle, which isn't all pantheists, of course, but more like where we're around, when you're in this cycle, it's very easy to be like, wow, like I am actually part of the divine. When you start to hear about this, you're like, that's the deepness that I've been seeing, that I've been witnessing, that I've like seen in other people and in the world around me. Like there is beauty everywhere, not just in human beings, but like in nature, in the earth itself. Because pantheism would say that, I mean, if you just view it as like a symbol, like a pan, it sounds like a hungry religion, right? Like wow, that sounds like a yummy religion. It's a pan, but if you're a pantheist, you just believe that everything that's in the pan is God, right? Everything that there is, like the span of all the things that could be, are God, right? And so you're seeing all this beauty, and you're like, wow, like this beauty like has a deeper meaning and a deeper purpose and value, and I feel a part of it, right? When you go in nature, I don't know about you, Ethan, but I usually feel pretty connected to it, and I feel like I'm close to God. I think it's easy for a lot of people to feel that and be like, wow, like we are connected and we're meaningful. And it's pretty easy to jump from there to start using language of divinity and like a higher power.
They're like in the woods, like, wow, it's so beautiful. I feel so connected to the spiritual. Like, I must be the one who created this.
Yeah.
I must be the guy. It's like I don't mean to be crass, but it's like almost a narcissistical jump, or maybe like an unintentional narcissistic jump to think that you're the divine. But I don't mean that to be
Mm.
like rude, because I don't expect people to then to. It seems like a natural thing, right? What's ironic is
Yeah.
they're searching for a deeper meaning. There is truth in the thing they're searching for. There's a spirituality that exists in the universe that they are craving. The Bible talks about how it has this analogy of like we're like reaching in this cave, basically. Like, do you remember what verse that is? I forget what verse that is, but it's kind of like I think it's an Acts. Paul quotes it. It's one of their philosophers, but that we would like have something in us that longs for the divine, for the spiritual. Ecclesiastes says that God has put eternity in the hearts of man. So it makes sense that everyone has this innate thing in them that's like, man, there's something deeper. And usually, like, maybe the materialist wouldn't say that, but the secularist wouldn't say that. And some of these
Yeah.
people who are becoming pantheists, maybe they come from like previously were secular, and they're like, wait, no, this is not
Mm.
true, or that's not true. It's not just material. Like, there's something deeper out there, and so they're going towards a good desire of connecting with the spiritual. But what's ironic is in their search for a deeper meaning, arriving at pantheism, I think almost takes the value of being an individual out of life, and takes
Yeah.
the meaning of being an individual out of life. And so it's just really interesting to think that they're craving something real and deep, and they're arriving at something that sounds cool and mysterious and hard to understand. And so maybe that's one of the allures. Like, it's like a Gnostic type thing, like the secret
Mm.
wisdom that you become part. You have to just recognize you are the divine, and you've already arrived. You don't have to go for anything. One, it makes it convenient, but two, it does add this idea of like, oh yeah, I'm that special. And what's even better than even being like quote unquote that special is being created by something that's special with a purpose, rather than being the thing that is experiencing itself. Because then how do you even make sense of that, and how do you grow beyond that? Maybe that's not something they care about, but I'm just thinking like, man, how much better is it to recognize like, no, there is a God out there. You're right about that, and this God really does have a plan and purpose for your life. You're not just here by accident.
Mm. Yeah.
Anyways,
For pantheists,
my
I don't think they
soapbox.
believe that they created anything necessarily. Like you are God, but everything is God and has always been that way. So nothing is technically created. Like everything is just God experiencing itself in
Yeah,
different perspectives. And so I don't I think it is obviously, like you were saying, it is a little prideful. And I think different people will take it to those extremes. I don't think by nature people that I've met that are pantheists are super prideful. I think they're more trying to understand their experience of being a limited, like just being in this world that also seems to be more valuable than people are saying that they are, right? Which is just a normal human experience. And so they're saying, wow, like I must be more important because I feel more important. Like human existence feels more important. And so because I'm aware, I must be a part of some kind of divine. And uh but because of that doesn't mean that I have to be all knowing or all powerful or something like that, or like the creator of everything. But I'm just like, this is what I'm supposed to be experiencing right now. And I'm a part of like the divine oneness or whatever. So it's really strange. Like someone could totally take that to like a very narcissistic place and start trying to be the king of the world or whatever. But it seems like a lot of people either don't take purpose from it or take a very like pleasure driven purpose from it of like all the good experiences I can have, I'm going to try to have so that I can, or like the highest I can get spiritually is like what I'm going to try to achieve and run after. So I don't think there in pantheism there's really a set purpose to it necessarily besides fully realizing that you're divine.
Yeah, it seems like they have the recognition that they have some type of intrinsic value, which Christians would affirm, but they don't know necessarily where that value comes from, or it seems like maybe they can't place it objectively.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're coming to the conclusion like, man, like, yeah, I seem to have something different than animals. Sure, good.
Mm-hmm.
There is a spiritual reality. Yes, I mean, amen. And then it's like that's kind of where we disengage, or where they kind of like segue or go out, not segue, but that's where they diverge from us, because then we would say, yes, oh, that must mean there's something that put me here. And they would say, huh, well, if I'm this special, that means every human is this special and we all have this intrinsic value. Maybe that means because of that commonality, there's something bigger. Maybe we are all part of the thing. And so in my mind, it's like, even though I jokingly said it's like a narcissistic thing, it's not a crazy thing to land on, because it does. I know I've met people who believe in pantheism, and they do have a mentality where it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to be more loving to people because I recognize everyone is divine. And they
Yeah.
and I would say not people aren't divine, but they have intrinsic value placed on them by God.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, it's like interesting that some of the fruit is like an acceptance of people and the mistakes that people make, and like a different kind of love for them. But I wonder if the actual fruit, like, tell me what you think about this. It kind of makes sense that a pantheistic worldview could result in apathy or indifference towards injustice in the world if we're all just the universe experiencing itself. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah.
It's like,
I mean,
it's so much love for everybody, but almost like because they accept everything, it's like, well, at what point do you stop accepting things and call them wrong? Does that make sense?
right. I mean, that's the same critique that we've had of Buddhism and Hinduism before, and maybe for different reasons philosophically, but of course because of the caste system. But like, if you're truly supposed to experience what you're experiencing, the suffering that some people are experiencing is just what they're supposed to be experiencing, and you don't necessarily have to try to help them out of it. I think you could, like, because technically, there's no purpose. Like, there's no. This is one of the philosophical problems, in my opinion, with pantheism. There's no personal God, right? Like, God is not personal, is not interacting as like a force of the divine in the world to try to stop or start anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
But just the totality of experiences of things that can be experienced is something that you're experiencing and you're going through. And so part of that are good experiences, and part of that are bad. And some people's totality of their life is negative experiences, basically. And maybe you're lucky enough to be a California pantheist and you're feeling pretty good. Like eggs are expensive, but besides that, like you're doing pretty good. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's sunny and you're gonna go to the beach.
Yeah.
Like you're having some good experiences. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, yeah, it'd be other parts where you could be born in Myanmar when earthquakes are happening, and you're like, that's a bad experience. And then one of the questions I have is like, okay, let's say they're right. The universe is conscious, but apparently not personal, unless you think because humans are personal, this universe is personal. But let's say the universe is conscious. Why? My biggest question for pantheists is why does this God, why does this universe need to experience itself? What is it gaining?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what they would say to that?
Can you say the question one more time?
Like, why does the universe need to experience itself?
I don't think there is a purpose necessarily. But I do think that is one of the philosophical flaws to the religion or the philosophical viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to go through like all the philosophical problems now, or talk more about like why people would be pantheists first or anything?
Um, I guess we can move on to. I'd be down to move on to philosophical, unless you think there's more reasons people would be pantheists that you want to go over.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just lay out a really clear for everyone's perspective reason of why people are pantheists,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll go straight into that from there.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's obviously different categories of why people accept different religious perspectives or different philosophical perspectives. Um, and those categories are like philosophical, you might have emotional, spiritual or mystical, scientific, ethical. Like there's all these different categories, right? And so I took these categories and I kind of made a reason for each one of them of like why you would want to be a pantheist. And so philosophically, there's like the idea of a higher power, you're more valuable, but that's all united. And so you sort of have that grounding to say, okay, this validates philosophically why I want to be a pantheist. From an emotional or like aesthetic perspective, there's a definite awe and beauty to the life around you that you can't deny. You're like, wow, like either this is a mistake or like there's something deeper here. So I think pantheism fulfills that as well. There's a kind of a mystical or spiritual, like personal experience of a oneness that you see in humanity. Like Ethan and me talked about, you feel very connected spiritually when you're in nature, and you can feel very connected to animals and some of your relationships with them. You can feel connected to people in some of your relationships with them. So it kind of validates that higher value or power sense of connectedness spiritually between, in my opinion, created things, right? Um, Scientifically, I don't think it goes against any like scientific laws necessarily. There's actually some really interesting connections that I have listened to pantheists make between uh, quantum theory and their idea of like the universe being like experiencing itself and having consciousness be like fundamental to the universe. I would argue that consciousness is fundamental to the universe, but that consciousness is God. Um, from an ethical perspective, I think it does obviously encourage a positive respect towards life, although that varies depending on your cultural approach to pantheism. Um, and lastly, I think culturally, at least in the West, it gives you a reason to believe in something that is yourself, but is bigger and higher and more respectable, while being able to rid yourself of the constraints of Western Christianity and following rules or having to place that burden on yourself, if that makes sense, of following God and what God wants you to do. So I think those are some of the reasons why people are pantheists. Then the problems with it, the other side of the coin, I think there's philosophical problems and contradictions. And we can get into more of those, as I'm sure like Ethan has a lot of questions too. But your first question from that, Ethan, was like something about experience, right? Like,
Yeah, like
how do they
why?
know?
Like,
Oh yeah,
it's
why?
just like because in my mind, if we're gonna maybe it's like a question of defining God because we would say God is a maximally supreme being who lacks nothing, even experiences. So it's like, well, why does this God need to experience itself? It makes it seem like it lacks something and it needs to learn. Which then it's
Mm,
like, okay, maybe we have a different definition of what a God is if your God has to undergo a process of evolution almost through experience.
sure. Oh, 100%. I don't think I have an answer to that fully, right? In most of the pantheists that I've talked to philosophically, not talked to, listened to online, try to explain this topic, there really is just like a mystical nature around what the reason God has for existence or how we all got here. But there's just an acceptance of the idea that you are worth more, like you are part of some kind of higher or transcendent thing. And it just kind of it
Interesting.
stops there.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm like, okay, so you say you're part of the transcendent. You believe that you are God experience itself. And it's like, well, are you the pantheists in America, are you more special than the part of
Mm,
God who is a kid born in war torn Middle East who might die by the time he's 5? Like, it's just like it also
mm,
comes seems like, and maybe this is kind of a conclusion I draw from their philosophy. It seems like almost like I don't want to say schizophrenic, but almost like a schizophrenic version of a God where it's like, why do you need to experience the worst that humanity has to offer and the best humanity has to offer? And if you are yourself, if we're all the divine, then how do we have technically free will? And then
Mhm.
why are countries fighting against each other? Like it just
Yeah.
doesn't. I just can't conceptualize a being that intentionally splits itself up into different people groups that will fight against each other.
Mm. My like more deeper philosophical question there is like, how is that possible, right?
Right.
Because if if there is some kind of thing that is God, that is everything necessarily that exists, like all of us, by definition, and maybe they just have a different definition, like you said, by definition, God would be encompassing everything that is possible to be encompassed. That's what we believe about God, right? Like we believe that God has to have all the power, spatial awareness, all that kind of stuff, all knowledge, right? And so if God has all of the knowledge that can exist and we are a part of God, then how do you limit yourself? Like you said, how do you split yourself off and start to experience things all of a sudden? It doesn't make a ton of sense philosophically that you could limit your knowledge all of a sudden. But I think that's why they say they're just a part of God experiencing God's self. So like maybe one of God's brain cells and the totality of God's brain cells is all knowledge, but like you're just part of a brain cell that's limited in some way. But I don't understand how you would split everything up into parts. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
That are limited.
I wonder if they would say like, well, Ethan, you can put your left hand in cold water and your right hand in hot water, and you can feel the extremes of both of those.
Mhm.
And so maybe that's part of it. But then it's like, but why would I punch myself in the face? Like I
Yeah.
don't. It seems against evolution to inflict harm on yourself. And so I'm not obviously I don't really believe in most extreme versions of evolution, but maybe assuming they do, it's like no one, no species inflicts pain on itself. So why would the most maximally supreme species thing entity do that? Now maybe they'd say, "Oh, it's a
Mhm.
mystery. It's beyond our knowledge. We're just part of this," and they take everything on faith way more than other religions do. Because it just it doesn't seem like it all. A lot of people I talk to who believe in pantheism, it seems like they have to turn their brain off to logic.
Mhm. Think about this, right? We're talking about how could God split himself up into like, or itself up into different parts, right? And still be everything necessarily. My question is, why are we using language like God in the first place? Because if God is by definition everything, then there would be no distinction of God and not God, right? It would always just be it,
Mm,
right? And so why would there be this distinction of what is divine and what is not divine, or you have to realize that you're divine? Like you realizing you are you is you just realizing that you're God. Like that, like there's no God and not God if everything is just God. You know what
yeah,
I mean?
yeah,
Like
that's a
why
great
even
question.
make that distinction
Yeah, it's and also like
categorically?
yeah, that's a great point because you could just it's like you're like, all right, I realize I'm God, and it's like, well, what good does that bring you? Do you get like
Yeah.
superpowers? Can you, or is it like the Buddhists where you like can escape this illusion that you? But then it's like, well, if you're the God and you're escaping an illusion, you put yourself under that illusion. So
But that's also impossible because God is not aware. Like within pantheism, there's no
interesting.
personal nature to God. God isn't aware. God can't like do actions to like put himself under some kind of spell or illusion or something like that, right?
Well, he might be able to in pantheism because he
No,
puts
because
himself through war against himself. He like splits his being, or its being.
but that's just God experiencing itself. So it's not something God like did to itself necessarily. I don't think. I think it's something that God is experiencing. But at the same time, if you don't have if you don't have some kind of action, something that's been started, then there's no experience that you could possibly have. So it's just all very confusing philosophically how you get there. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
and almost like, well, what I would like to know is like, what do you mean experience itself?
Mhm.
What is it when before it causes creation, whatever, before it does something, before it moves? What is it doing that it's like, oh, I need this, and how does it know it needs an experience? And what is that? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, if we get down to the very nitty gritty.
Yeah. There's a lot of contradictions philosophically with
Yeah.
pantheism that are easier when you have distinctions like Christianity, where there's the created that are separate from the creator. You lose a lot of these philosophical problems just because of the distinction between created thing that is not divine versus thing that is divine, right? If you think about it, like if you and I are changing, even if we are God, right, and we're coming to an awareness of being God, right, that means we went from a state of not being aware that we're God to being aware that we're God. That's some kind of change, right? So a change has occurred. How is it possible that God is changing? Like,
Boom.
just philosophically, that is a contradiction. Like, if by definition, if you're God, you can't change. Like, God is unchanging or unchangeable. And so it's impossible for God to have some kind of experience that, like in this worldview, to go from a non-awareness to an awareness. Just doesn't make a lot of sense. Another interesting point, unless you have a thought on that.
No, I was just gonna say, like, did you ever play with like action figures when you were a kid? And you would make, yeah. So I would have my little toy soldiers or whatever, and like side A's fighting side B, and I'm the one deciding like, okay, this guy died, this guy lived, this guy's the hero for whatever reason. But it's like all of it's just like because I was deciding in the moment, and I wonder. It kind of seems like pantheism is like that, where it's like, oh, I just decided like I want to experience this type of thing, you know. I wanted to experience what war is like, but it's like, well, you had to that God had to invent war to experience it. So a lot of it doesn't make sense. I'm like, guys, what are we talking about?
I think one of the root problems or contradictions with pantheism is the idea that God is not personal or aware, right? Because that's where we get all of the goodness in the world that we experience, right? We say as Christians that the reason we have love and affection and community and like commitment to one another and all that kind of stuff in a relationship is because those are part of who God is. We have those things because they're gifts from God. They're part of his character, part of his nature. And his awareness and his personalness is what allows us to have those things. That's what allows us to exist. Like, we couldn't exist if God couldn't make choices to create us, right? So he would have to be personal and intentional to be able to do that. And so if you don't have that personal nature, if you don't have that intentional nature, then you can't become anything. You can't start anything, right? You can't create human beings, all that kind of stuff. Of course, that's kind of a different worldview. But the point is that you don't get those good aspects of what God is, because God's not personal. Love, by definition, can't exist if God isn't personal and can't love something, right?
Yeah.
Even if, by a flimsy definition, in my opinion, God could love himself or itself, right? Without a Trinity, I think that's kind of impossible. But in some flimsy philosophy, I think you could say God could love himself, so God could create, if you're a Muslim or something like that. Like, those things can't exist, in my opinion, if God doesn't have awareness or intentionality. But the distinction is here for pantheism is that how do you go from an unconscious God, so a God that can't make conscious decisions, doesn't have some kind of consciousness, how do you go from a God that can't make choices to all of a sudden a God that can experience itself? Like, if we're aware, but God is not aware, how is that possible?
How do we know that they say God's not aware? Are you saying because before anything
that's
happened?
the basis of pantheism. God isn't aware.
Oh wow, that's so weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God is impersonal.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, I wonder if there's some classical theist who would say God's not personal, but I bet they'd say that he is, but he's just not, like, he's impassible, whatever. Anyways, that's a side tangent. One thing that stuck out to me that I'll just make a quick note of is if you don't have a Trinitarian God and this God does have love, do you think it's fair to say that that love would be narcissistic? Because if you only love yourself, you're a narcissist or you're incredibly prideful. And so it wouldn't be pure love if God wasn't Trinitarian and had love. Does that make sense?
I don't think so, because I think to be a narcissist,
No, it doesn't make sense. No.
well, I don't think it does make sense, because to be a narcissist, you would have to have another being that you could be like narcissistic towards.
True. Okay. Well, I guess maybe
which is
selfish.
why I don't think you could be love. You couldn't be selfish either, because I mean, I guess you would be selfish, like, by definition.
Like, if I love myself more than anything that is,
but there's nothing else.
Like, what do I have to give away?
Direct your love towards.
Right. Exactly. Like, if I just solely love myself and I'm going to live for myself, I'm not going to live for anyone else. I'm not going to do anything that benefits people. So we kind of talked about this years ago on the is God evil? But if God's not Trinitarian and he is love, he just loves himself and he doesn't have any love to give away because there's no like love is not towards anything else. Does that make sense? Maybe I'm getting on a side tangent. We can rein it back in.
No, I think it's a good conversation. I just don't fully understand. I think what you're saying.
Okay, you want me to explain it more?
Yeah.
So, if there's one God, like the Muslim worldview, has just one being, one God, we'd say our God is one being, but triune. Um, so if there's just one and it's not triune, and He is loving, my question is like, if He does have love, but He just exists by Himself, the object of His love is just Himself. So what is His motivation for creating? Because if He just loves Himself, and he doesn't need any, he doesn't want to give that to the other another being. Where our God, being triune, being relational, knows what the love would be to give away, and knows how amazing love to another thing is, wants to share that. Does that make sense?
I think you're just describing a God that doesn't love at all. Because what does it mean for one being that is the only being in existence to love itself?
It would be to
Like
not
that would mean
give
that would
away,
mean there's
right?
a state. Well, I just think that means there's a state where God doesn't love himself and a God where God does love himself, because you would have to have that distinction to say that God could love itself, right? Like it doesn't make any sense. Like if God is always just loving itself, then that's just God, and there's no real like distinction between love and non-love for God, because it's
Yeah,
the
it would
only
just be
thing
what
God would be
is.
experiencing. It's just what is. Yeah, so there wouldn't even be the
Yeah,
definition of love. So it doesn't make any sense. Also, I don't think you can have love philosophically unless you have two things that could share something. So you
that's
can
probably where
demonstrate
I'm
some
getting
kind of
at.
love.
That's probably what I'm getting at. Where it's like if you just have one non-triune being
Mhm.
and you're going to say that he has love, then it's like, well, what do you mean by that? Because if he is what he is and he is loving, then he doesn't need. I guess like we don't believe God created us because he needs to show love. We believe God created us because out of love to like show amazing creatures. Hey, like this is how good love is. Like I'm giving away my
Mhm.
love. It feels great. And it's amazing. You should give away love back to other people and me. And you're like, that's the best way we live our life. But for the we're just using Muslims as a placeholder right now, but there's other religions, maybe Jewish, you could say too. Although you could argue the two powers in heaven. Anyways, we're getting on so many side tangents. But if you have just one God type, one non-triune God, what? How does it love? Does that make sense? Like before it creates, how does it love?
You can't, in my opinion.
Yeah. So I would say the Muslim God then can't objectively be loving.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. So back to pantheism.
Yeah.
I think even crueler than that idea, like God not being able to love, is the idea that if God is everything, right? I think this is kind of one of my last points on like the philosophical problems that pantheism has. If people are going to come to pantheism because they want some kind of moral worldview where they can feel positive about themselves and about other people, because they have this interconnectedness of humanity and of all things, right? Spiritually. If you're going to say God is everything, then God is also responsible, but also same in essence with all of the worst injustices you can think of: rape, genocide, the worst things you can think of. That's God performing those actions because you are God, right? The worst things you've done, but not only that, the worst things that any human has done, or the worst things that have been done to humans, even just by nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
All natural disasters. Christians have a hard enough time with the problem of evil. We think we have some explanations of why God could do that, but none, literally zero of those explanations make sense for a pantheistic worldview. In a pantheistic worldview, you have to say God is directly responsible for all evil that exists, because God not only in some form created it, experiences it, but also like just is it in itself, right? Because all things are God. So that means there's no moral ramifications for the evil that's done. There's no ultimate justice that will be served to people who've chosen to do immoral actions, no matter how detestable. Like none of those things there's retribution for, or moral distinctions in, even, right? Because if everything is God, there's no like, there is truly no good or evil. And so it doesn't make sense to me that you would want to be a pantheist if you just think a little deeper about it, right? It could feel cool at the beginning of like, oh my gosh, I'm God. I always knew it. I always knew I was important or something like that. And then you're like, oh, if I'm God, that means that God is responsible for evil and justice and all of it, actually. And like, oh, actually, that's not a good thought. I don't actually think I like that very much. Like, philosophically, he's responsible for those things. It's crazy.
You.
Yeah.
Philosophically, it's like you kill people and you rape people and you sell them into slavery and take advantage of them. You have to believe
Hmm.
that. So how do you then love yourself if you do believe, oh my gosh, we're all God, experiencing stuff so amazing, and then you're like, wait, that means if I am the same as Derry and Derry's the same as his neighbor, we're all part of this God. That means I'm the same as the terrorist. That means I'm the same
Hmm.
as Hitler. That means I'm the same as the person who Hitler murdered too. So it's like, oh my gosh, like that, yeah, that's really uncomfortable. And you can't push it off on a different being and not take the blame. Like you have to answer for, hey, if you're divine, if you're God, why did you do that?
Yeah.
And no one wants to think about that, but that's a great point. But it's also then like this, I think this is kind of why Buddhists will try to say like don't have attachments because it doesn't really matter. Like if everything is part of one and everything is God, then you can't actually qualify what happens to people through war as evil. It's not evil. It's just this being doing it to itself. So who cares? It like kind of equals out because it's like, oh, it's doing the evil. It's also receiving the evil and it's also stopping the evil. So it's like, at what? How do you have morals if everything is just
Hmm.
the universe experiencing itself and it's conscious? You can't ever say anything's wrong. Like you were just saying, it's nothing's good or evil. Just it is. And so if something
Yeah.
bugs you morally and you get mad at injustice, which a lot of people, everyone who has a really heart does, you can't get mad. You can't be pantheistic. And if you are a pantheist and you get mad, then you might not be a pantheist for long because you'll realize, oh wow, this isn't coherent. I can't think that I and everyone who exists is part of God and think that these things are wrong. I either have to think they're wrong or I have to think it's the universe experiencing itself.
Yeah. I feel like that, like what we've come to at the end here, is really like the bedrock of like the greatest contradictions within pantheism. Like you could maybe live with the like, I don't know how God is like having personal aware experiences, but also like not personal or aware. Like I just don't know. But to say like, oh, every human, just say every human is God, and all of a sudden you have tons of moral quandaries on your hand that you have to deal with. There's, I don't see any way out of those philosophically. Like you, everything. If everything is God, then well, I guess you could get out of it by saying the same thing that a lot of atheists say, in that they're just nihilists and that nothing really matters. There is no true like morality, and so all things are just allowable and just how they should be because you're just God experiencing itself, and so it really ultimately doesn't matter. So I guess if you want to go that route and say that pain and suffering doesn't matter, then good for you. Like that's what you can go and do, but I don't think you can live that way practically.
Right. That's one of the things I had written down about some of the philosophical problems is pantheism forces the person who believes it to turn a blind eye to injustice and pain and suffering.
Hmm.
Like you shouldn't why care about anyone going through hardship if it's just one God, one being experiencing itself. It's
Yeah.
like, well, if it didn't want to experience that, it would stop. It clearly wants to
What
experience it. So
I
how
think
can
people
I
would
get
just
in
say
my
like,
way?
yeah. I think people would just say like, well, if I'm God and that person's God, which is also a very similar Christian feeling, right? If you have value because you're God's creation and I have value because I'm God's creation, I want to help you out because you're valuable. And so a pantheist would probably say, well, I would like to help you out because you're valuable because you are God, just like me, and I would like to help myself out because I'm not a selfish, or I guess I am a selfish person,
I
right?
want to help
And so
myself out.
I want to help myself out, so I'm gonna give things to people and volunteer my time and do as much good as I can in the world because I want to help it out. But at the same time, like you're doing that, there's someone taking all the things that you're giving, not maybe directly, but like indirectly in another part of the world, causing just as much, if not more, evil than the good that doing, and there's no moral difference between the two of you, right? You just feel a certain way, so you're going to do a certain thing, and the other person feels a certain way, so they're going to do a certain thing. And if everything is God, then there's no true moral distinction between your two actions.
Yeah, that's it. You really can't say anything's evil. It just things are just
Yeah.
are. And so then it really is a problem because they're like, well, who's to say that anything's wrong and crime? Like it really comes down to like same thing with atheism where it's like, what do you do with morality? Everything that comes down to like conversations about like the nature of God, it seems like they all go back to morality almost. Like, how do you understand morality and like what you view about God determines what you believe about morality almost. But yeah, that's a really good point for the pantheist that it's like, hey, like, how can you say things are wrong?
Yeah. You cannot. Boom.
All right. Excuse me. I had a cough there.
I think that's most of the points that I wanted to make. There's obviously a lot of like established religions, more Eastern that believe this. I personally think Mormons are pantheists. There's a lot of New Age people that are pantheists. I don't really. I think some of those religions are sort of popular in the pop world, but not super popular. So I don't know. Just don't be those religions. And if there's anyone of those religions that thinks they can defend pantheism, I'd love to have you on and we can talk about it and have a good conversation. Because generally, I don't know how you get past those philosophical problems with pantheism.
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, some concluding thoughts on pantheism. I think that it produces an indifference towards injustice if you are going to accept it wholesale, and it ultimately tries to find purpose, but at the end of the day takes away purpose and meaning from the individual. Whereas Christianity offers an answer to injustice, knowing that God is going to set everything straight, that those who are perpetrators of injustice will answer to God unless they ask for forgiveness and repent, right? And also gives meaning and purpose to the individual and the community as well. So we have philosophical answers for injustice and purpose and meaning. So if you've been exploring pantheism, if you are interested in this, check out Christianity. If you have problems with Christianity, you can message us and we'd love to talk to you about them and hopefully iron some things out for you.
Yeah. Thanks for watching, everybody. We appreciate it. Check us out all over the place. Check out Ethan's channel. It's linked in the description. And we'll hopefully see you next time.
Shoots.